Citations Rages, Generally 101, back again with some more law, and good God almighty, look at this humongous chungus among us! Take a look at that big chunky bastard of a boy! With the introduction of the brand new, which is not new but technically new, Saturnine Armor and the final clarification of this lore, we get to take a look at one of the greatest inventions wrought by the hands of our very own Lord Lava Nugget, Papa Vulkan himself. Yeah, well, this is a big change for the lore in Warhammer. Most people don't understand just how big of a change it really is, and what it truly means for Vulkan and his story. How did Vulkan revive the Saturnine Pattern armor? Why was he the only one who was able to do it? How this edition changed everything for the Horus Heresy, and most importantly, how Vulkan's greatest gift proved to be his ultimate undoing. So strap on in, buckle up, and let's get crack-a-lackin' on. As in today's Warhammer 40k lore video, ladies and gentlemen, we find out how Vulkan's greatest gift was used against him. As per usual, sources are found over here. Have fun with them. Alright, so first thing first, let's talk about the contentious topic of the Saturnine Pattern Tactical Dreadnought Armor. You see, way back when, during the days of 1st edition, the first ever Terminators ever created were the Saturnine Pattern Tactical Dreadnought Armor. And lo and behold, did Warhammer 40k get its first ever unique pattern of Warhammer Terminator Plate. Except, this is a lie. How'd you doing, artists? Give me the Dr. Pepper. But no else to pull out that meme. Yeah, but that is what most people think, but that is actually completely, totally, and utterly wrong. You see, this was never actually canon. This is just what the Warhammer 40k community thought was canon, put two and two together, and didn't actually bother correcting with GW. This phenomenon is commonly known as the Mandela Effect. Ahala Madiba. Essentially, what happened was, way back when during 1st edition, an official White Dwarf released the several different concept arts of Terminator armor. That included the Cataphracti, the Tartaros, what we now know as Saturnine, and of course, the Indomitus. Eventually, the Indomitus would be chosen as the main Terminator armor. Saturnine, or what we call Saturnine, was just a design for OG Terminator armor, and if that was chosen as the true Terminator armor, it would have been called Indomitus. But we get some mentionings of Saturnine, more particularly from the Horus Heresy series. It is said that Saturnine is mentioned alongside Cataphracti as well as Tartarus, but it is stated very clearly they are basically the same thing, except they are aesthetically different. So immediately when you throw out that word aesthetically, people then began looking. Alright, where exactly do we see aesthetically different Terminator armor? People begin looking, they begin going back, and lo and behold, way back when during 1st edition, we see an aesthetically different Terminator armor, which lo and behold, people then coined Saturnine Plate. And lo and behold, the Mandela Effect was in full swing, and everyone thought that Saturnine Terminator Plate was indeed this OG original plate that was forgotten by everyone, both in lore and out of lore. But in reality, this is just the community putting two and two together. And for the longest time, it stayed in limbo like that, being in this weird place of not canon but fanon. And lo and behold, GW saw that and they finally put pen to paper and made Saturnine properly canon. And now we have a brand new storyline to go for it. So, now that you have all that TLDR nonsense out of the way, let's talk about the brand new canon story of Saturnine Terminator Pattern Tactical Dreadnought Armor. So the new story goes as thus. Saturnine Plate was the first ever Terminator armor ever used. It was the first ever combat armor and it was used on the final days of the Unification Wars and the early days of the Great Crusade era. Basically, super early on, when the Legion Astartes were kicking up, this is the first ever tactical dreadnought armor that was given in. Problem is though, it was terribly big, terribly chunky, terribly complex, terribly hard to produce and maintain. Basically, this was the first ever prototype, and it was all cobbled together from various bits and bobs, and it was just really difficult to maintain because it was so chunky. They were still trying to figure out, they haven't streamlined anything, so they were just rolling with what they had, and lo and behold, on a grand galaxy conquering wide scale, having something that isn't really that super simple to be put together with just a toolbox and some duct tape, not exactly the best for logistics. So eventually the Primarchs come along, and the Cataphracti and the Tartarus comes along. We have Ferris Manners to thank for that. As whilst many people seem to forget that First exists, when it comes to Terminator technology, we have a lot of him to thank for. He had a hand in making the Cataphracti, he made his custom Gorgon armor. In addition, he was the one who pioneered the creation of Indomitus Plate. Now, the Primarch of the Iron Tenth really had a good head for technology. Shame he lost it. But basically, with Tartarus and Cataphracti and various different new versions of Terminator armor being produced, the old school that was Saturnine slowly began turning into myth, into legend, and many people began wondering if it even did exist, because it was quickly dropped because Cataphracti is significantly easier to maintain and produce. Still difficult, but when you compare it to Saturnine, it's something else. And it would seem that this first ever tactical dreadnought giant would sadly be lost and forgotten, not even a footnote in the history of the Great Crusade. That was, however, until we enter our favorite, big, chunky, lovable dragon dad himself, Vulkan, baby. Now, of course, we don't really have that much to go off of when it comes to the new lore, but we do know for a fact that Vulkan learned about Saturnine Pattern tactical dreadnought armor, and he decided in his heart of hearts then and there that he was going to restore it. Now, why exactly Vulkan chose to do this, we don't really know. We're probably going to get some new information with the new book, and probably a book series, and there's a journal series apparently coming, so keep an eye out for that. But I imagine during then we're going to actually get like a good idea of like why Vulkan did what he did. But regardless of why he did it, we do know that he did indeed do it well. Vulkan was able to take the schematics and what was already existed of the Saturnine Pattern armor. He took it and he would then translate it and transform it into this new reinvigorized version. Basically, he took the original prototype and he streamlined it into something completely different, something better. Meaning that most of the previous flaws that had with Saturnine were ironed out by a big old Papa Vulkan himself, and he put his own Dragon Dad spin on it, making it sleek, deadly, chunky, and most importantly, cool as all hell. But Papa Vulkan didn't stop there. He saw the Saturnine Pattern technology, and he realized that he could develop it into other things. And what's more chunky than a Terminator, but an actual dreadnought? Because who needs to be tactical when you have a big chunky fist? Lo and behold, we come to the Saturnine Pattern dreadnought. The Leviathan has officially been dethroned as the chunkiest Space Marine dreadnought ever to exist. But now the real question is this big chunk bigger than the Telemon? Or do the Golden Gilded Boys of the Emperor still hold their place as having the biggest dreadnought bonking stick? We'll find out soon enough, but I don't know, this thing looks pretty fucking chunky, mate. But regardless of it, Vulkan was able to create a new version of the dreadnought. And this dreadnought is, as I said, the most powerful, the most potent, and the most deadliest that the Space Marines have access to. And interestingly enough, Vulkan didn't just stop there. He decided that the two best weapons for these dreadnoughts, both the tactical version and the big chunkiest version, were a combination of heavy plasma bombards as well as disintegration cannons. Disintegration technology is a brand new thing being introduced in Horus Heresy. And as per usual, anytime anything new, quote unquote, is being introduced into Warhammer, that means that it was super really old that was forgotten, that has just been restored. Disintegration technology has always been around, but now we get the first foretaste of it being introduced into the Legion's wide scale. And these are both deadly and terrifying weapons. But if you like something with a bit more punch, but then you get a new type of power weapon, known as a Power Disruption Fist, which is basically a regular old power fist, but better because of Vulkan, Lamau. And if like me, you were initially sad that the dreadnought did not have any punchy bits, worry not, for it turns out that big old plasma bombard on it can be charged into some type of melee weapon. Basically, you just punch somebody with that and like you shoot them like point blank with like a shotgun blast of plasma. I don't really know how it works, I'm gonna be honest. I just have to wait for the rules to come out, but I'm really hyped to talk about it. But hey, even if there is no actual proper melee, that big old bombard is still made of metal and it's still gonna crush a Space Marine. Or you just have him do this is Sparta kick and shove a motherfucker down a well. Either way, this thing is great. But aside from me getting sidetracked talking about how awesome these things are, Vulkan was able to incorporate these two unique technologies into the Saturnine proper. He didn't just revive it, he did a full-on pimp my ride version of it. Better armor, better weapons, melee range, everything in between. And he created a brand new set to be the ultimate Space Marine power armor, period. Aside from a Space Marine being chucked in a dreadnought, this is the best thing that a Space Marine has access to. Also, just look at that Space Marine Praetor. It's so gorgeous. And again, that disruption hammer is humongous. That thing is twice the size of a standard Space Marine, bro. Homie there is going to be going one-on-one with actual dreadnoughts, and I am so here for it. Though, not gonna lie, the rumors that they're going to be able to 1v1 Primarchs, I don't think that's alright. But hey, I reserve judgment until the proper book comes out. But whilst Vulkan had done everything, he completed his whole tutorial, he completed the prototype, and he had a full box of these boys ready to ship, Vulkan then had a choice. You could either file his patents and claim this is a Legion-specific only do not steal version, or he could share it with the rest of his brothers. And if you know Vulkan, you know exactly what he did. Vulkan would ship versions, schematics, and actual armor to every single Legion in the Imperium. Vulkan made a personal effort that every single Legion got access to this armor. Because if his boys had some of the best armor possible, he wanted each and every one of his brothers and his nephews to have the same armor as possible. And it's not been confirmed yet, but it's highly likely that the traitors on Istaban were also using Saturnine Pattern dreadnought armor. Again, we haven't seen it, but it's very likely. But we'll talk more about that a little later. And lo and behold, just before the Dropsite Massacre, either a few months or a few years, Vulkan was able to get the entirety of the Legiones Astartes armed and equipped with Saturnine Pattern dreadnought armor, and they had the means to produce it and maintain them themselves. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is where the current lore of the Saturnine technology stands. Now, what exactly has GW changed? Of course, the main thing is that like they've made the actual Saturnine canon, which is, great in of itself, but more specifically, Saturnine has become not just the name for an armor, but rather it's become synonymous with a type of technology, because we've had the Saturnine Pattern Terminators and the Saturnine Pattern Dreadnought Armor. GW has even referred to it as Saturnine technology. By the way, if you guys are wondering why it's called Saturnine, originally the first ever units of this Terminator armor were created on Saturn. That's where like the whole schematics for it and where everything comes from. So, there you go. But basically, Vulkan was able to take this old Saturnine technology and revitalize it. But then that begs the question, how was Vulkan able to do it? You see, there are many Primarchs who are really good with skilling and crafting. The two main ones are our two Iron Boys, that being Mr. Ferris Minus, Look I Have Iron Hands, and Peter Lamau Catch Nerd, Turbo. We know that they were able to create a bunch of stuff and they're really good with crafting and creating. As I said before, Ferris Manus, pretty much well known for his old craftsmanship with the Terminator pattern, and Perty was able to create some disastrously terrible machines, including his Iron Circle Automata, and most notably, he would actually collab with Vulkan to create an old perpetual motion machine, a relic from the Dark Age technology. But both of these chaps theoretically could have resurrected Saturnine Pattern Terminator armor. But the question is, why didn't they? We know that from the lore blurb that we got. No one commanded Vulkan to do any of this. This was Vulkan's own personal desire. He saw it and he was like, I need to revive this. But why did Vulkan feel this way? That's because Vulkan is a weaponsmith. Vulkan is a master-crafted artisan maker. Of all the Primarchs, if you want something done beautifully, that is not only absolutely practical and efficient, but looks like it was crafted by a demigod, Vulkan is your man. Both Mr. Ferris Manus and Mr. Peter Turbo, they are great craftsmen in their own right, but in my opinion, they both have one trait that made them not even bother looking at Saturnine, that being their pragmatism. Ferris Manus is a full-on pragmatist. He doesn't really care for looks at all, any way, shape, or form. He just wants something to be efficient, brutal. Mr. Peter Turbo, he does love his aesthetics, but at the end of the day, if he has a job to do, to hell with aesthetics, give me something practical and fundamental. They had Cataphracti. Cataphracti did the job good enough. They didn't care about anything else beyond that. Vulkan, however, Vulkan does indeed care. It is in my opinion that when he saw Saturnine, he saw the vision of what it could be. Something better than Cataphracti. Something that could protect his sons, a technology that could revitalize the Imperium and give it even better soldiers. Whereas the other two Primarchs saw something that was frivolous, something that was unnecessary, Vulkan saw potential, and Vulkan was willing to take that risk. Because to a weaponsmith like Vulkan, there is nothing more beautiful than finding a derelict sword, restoring it to a sharpened hone edge, and wielding it in battle. That is something that Vulkan has literally done before, and that is something that Vulkan did with Saturnine Pattern Armor. So Vulkan, being the master craftsman that he is, he not only had the ability, but more importantly, he had the will and the desire to restore it. Fundamentally, two things that our other two Iron Boys lacked. And Vulkan, he had a habit of making and crafting things, particularly Terminators. As we notice particularly from the short story D's Endure, found within the Shattered Legions anthology, Vulkan was said to create unique sets of Terminator armor. These were said to be taller and wider than the standard Cataphracti plate, and they were said to be incredibly durable. So much so that only 20 of them were able to attack the entirety of an enemy traitor base. Not only that, they were able to make substantial headway, and they only lost half of their number against an entire base of several hundred Space Marines before they were joined by an Iron Hands company, which allowed them to completely roll over the enemy traitor positions. So Vulkan was already tinkering around with Terminators, creating his own unique patterns. In fact, before the whole canonization of Saturnine, many did indeed attribute Saturnine rather not as the first ever Terminator, but rather unto these unique suits that Vulkan himself made. Now, exactly how they're going to connect it in the new lore, again, we don't know. It could be that these prototype suits were Vulkan's first ever try at making an attempt to try and revitalize Saturnine technology, or there could have been something completely different. But given how this was directly after Istvan, I'm willing to lean towards the former rather than the latter, but again, that's just hearsay at the moment. But then, we have Vulkan, who already had experience crafting Terminators. He then makes his Terminators, and then he revitalizes Saturnine, and he distributes it amongst the entirety of the Legion. Not only his Legion, but every other Legion. And it is noted particularly in the lore that Vulkan made it one of his prime missions to make sure every single one of his boys got Saturnine Pattern Tactical Dreadnought Armor. Not only the actual armor, but the means to produce it, to repair it, to maintain it. Essentially, what any edge Vulkan could have had over his brothers, he gave away wholeheartedly. And it's not just the case of Vulkan gave them suits and they'd have to come to him for spare parts. Vulkan gave them literally every single thing they needed to have it a permanent staple in their armory without them ever needing to talk to him ever again. That is what Vulkan did. Vulkan didn't do this for clout. He didn't do this for political measures. He didn't do this for brownie points. Hell, he didn't even do this for the Emperor because the Emperor didn't ask him to do it. He did it because he felt in his heart of hearts that this beautiful weapon could be of use to him and his brothers. And when he had finished crafting it, spending painstaking, timeless hours making and building up this beautiful thing, he gave it all away without even so much of a brink of hesitation, knowing what it meant. And lo and behold, that was Vulkan's gift to his brothers. And it puts him in a very esteemed and prestigious category of being only one of 2 confirmed Primarchs that fully created brand new technology and shared them with the legions. The other being Magnus the Red, who created a Psychana interface that allowed psychically interned battle brothers within a dreadnought to still utilize their psychic abilities. However, unlike Magnus, whose gift was only accepted by the Blood Angels, and maybe the White Scars, not really sure about that, everyone took Vulkan's gift on wholeheartedly, and thus did Saturnine Armor become a mainstay of every single Horus Heresy Legion. Yet, Vulkan's gift would ultimately prove to be his downfall. And here we come to the crux of today's video. Vulkan had no idea what was going on in the wider galaxy at the time. Again, depending on what time exactly Vulkan may have created Saturnine, either that means anywhere from 1 all the way up to 9 legions could have been traitor at the time that Vulkan gave them this new gift. Because remember, Horus and most of the boys had already turned traitor prior to Istvan, but the Wordbearers themselves had been traitors nearly 50 years before the events of Istvan. 50 years. So as long as Vulkan developed Saturnine Pattern Tactical Dreadnought Armor within that 50-year time period before Istvan, at least 1 legion had become traitor, and was the Wordbearers of all people. Vulkan, out of his kindness, out of the goodness in his heart, out of the true love, what makes him the Salamander Dad and what makes us love him, unknowingly took an advantage that would have changed everything for the Loyalists and gave it to the traitors without even so much as a second thought. For Vulkan would have never even believed any one of his brothers could have turned against him. And again, it hasn't been confirmed, but we do know for a fact that all the traitor legions had access to Saturnine, and it's very, very, very likely that they used Saturnine on Istvan, meaning that Vulkan's gift to his brothers was being used to murder his own sons. And this really is one of the very big turning points in the Horus Heresy. Because much like Lion unknowingly giving Perturabo 2 giant old Dark Age technology siege engines, if Vulkan had been a different Primarch, if he had kept this technology away from the rest of his brothers, that meant that when the whole Dropsite massacre would have occurred, his legion would be the only ones with Saturnine Terminator armor and Saturnine Dreadnoughts. This is a massive point that we have to focus on. From what little we know about them, we know for a fact Saturnine Dreadnought armor is significantly better than even Cataphracti in terms of durability, power, as well as sheer mass. We also know that the Saturnine Dreadnought is bigger and better than the Leviathan, i.e., Saturnine Dreadnought armor is the definition of a force multiplier, both in Dreadnought and Terminator forms. Also, it's not really stated, but we don't know if the disintegrated technology was also part of Vulkan's invention, i.e., did he create disintegrated technology revived from the Saturnine schematics, or was disintegrated technology already widespread by that time? Again, this is something that we just need to wait for the book to come out to be flushed out completely, but if it's the case that Vulkan managed to retrofit disintegrated tech as well as incorporate into Saturnine proper, well then that makes the blade cut all the more deep. Now some people may argue against me, and again it's highly unlikely this could be the case, that if the Salamanders were the only legion that had Saturnine, they would have survived the Dropsite massacre. It still would have been a terrible defeat, but we do know for a fact that Salamanders in Cataphracti, the elite fire drakes of Vulkan, were able to form such a staunch rearguard that they were able to survive the devastating onslaught of several traitor legions. So much so that even well after the Battle of Istvan, veterans from that battle were still recalling on how the Salamanders just wouldn't die. If you combine that with this new Saturnine armor and what this armor would have meant, the fact that even Cataphracti armor would have struggled to pierce it, means one of two things. Either the Salamanders were able to hold out far more longer, meaning that much more of the Iron Hands and the Raven Guard were unable to escape, or two, Mr. Peter Turbo would have to launch the nukes earlier than expected, and in larger quantities, Thus, this would mean that there is a good chance that even more of the traitor forces would have been caught in the blast, due to the sheer fact that there is more nuclear ordnance in the air. Regardless, if the Salamanders were the only legion that had access to Saturnine technology, the drop site massacre would have been less worse for the Imperials. As to how much better it would have been, not that much if I'm being frank. But whereas we saw a mostly destruction of the Salamanders, mostly destruction of the Iron Hands, with the Raven Guard getting away with about, I believe, 60 or 70% casualties, I think it's safe to say that you could add a good 10, maybe 15% to both the Raven Guard and the Iron Hands. Regardless, it means that the Shattered Legions would have had more personnel to them. More time to escape, more time to coordinate, more time to have a better response. It would have changed something. Not to mention, what a lot of people don't know about Istvan, even after the major Dropsite Massacre occurred, there were several bands of the Shattered Legions that were still on Istvan, still fighting. Some of these ranged from a few tens all the way to a couple hundred. Now imagine if they had access to Saturnine Pattern in that area, where force multipliers are so terribly known for. And again, thanks to Big Papa Vulkan, Saturnine Pattern was just as easy to maintain as Cataphracti. Honestly, it's food for thought. But again, as for everything with this video, we're not really going to know too much until we get actual concrete lore of how Saturnine interacts with everything all around it. But ultimately, whatever advantage that the Salamanders would have had was given away by Vulkan. And why wouldn't he? Vulkan was ever the loyal son, and why would he ever want to keep something that kept his sons alive, when he knew that his nephews could have used it as well? And this just opens up the can of worms, really. We know that each individual legion had access to Saturnine, and we know that each individual legion also had their own unique type of Cataphracti. So who's to say that they didn't do their own unique things to Saturnine? Perhaps the traitors could have crafted something that was a particular legion killer, just for Istvan. Hell, perhaps maybe even they asked Vulkan for help on it. Regardless of how it played out, we now know for a fact that one of Vulkan's greatest gifts to his brothers ultimately ended up being used against him. But not just him, his entire legion, and in the matter of a single day, was a gift given in good faith, returned in utter bad faith. And the warplate of Saturn strode upon both sides of the black sands of Istvan, and both sides of that bloody conflict used it to murder one another. Yet just how bitter the sting of betrayal was already made, when used by the same blade that was given as a gift. But yeah, ladies and gentlemen, thank you all so very much for watching. I do hope that you guys liked today's video. I know that today's video, there was a lot of, but we don't really know yet. Again, I don't want to exactly make up lore and say that, oh no, this is this. A lot of this is speculation and theory, but as I said, sources are listed. I mean, hell, we got some information yesterday. So, you know, take all this with a grain of salt, but this is a massive change for Vulkan and his lore, aside from the Sally Boys finally getting some Heresy content, not to mention them, but the entirety of the Dropsite Massacre. The fact that Vulkan managed to revitalize this incredibly powerful technology, and he gave it onto everyone. Could you imagine if Vulkan had kept it until Istvan, and then after Istvan he just gave it to all the loyalists? It would have been such a massive edge for the loyalists. But Vulkan is Vulkan, and we love Vulkan for what he does, and Vulkan is not selfish. And no good deed goes unpunished. But let me know what you guys think down below. How do you guys feel about the new Saturnine Dreadnoughts? Do you like the way they're being incorporated into the lore? Do you like how they look? Are you a fan of chunky shoulders? I want to hear all those comments down below and much more. But I want to say a massive thank you to y'all guys for watching, and even more massive thank you to my awesome members and Patreons. Big shout out to my beautiful officer corps, Mr. Eddie V3 and Miss Majora of the Void. Big shout out to my Sartager members, Mr. Damiak, Mr. Andy McGee, Mr. Wolfsmith the Fireheart, Mr. Corns Butcher, Mr. Sean RL7, Mr. Bowen, and Mr. Matthew Merrill. Shout out to my Corporal Tier members, Mr. Tremeo the Math Kitty, Mr. Lord Rosarius, Miss Shauna Smithers, Mr. Tech Priest Toaster, and Mr. Rambling Hamster. And finally, but absolutely certainly not least, big shout out to my private tier members, Mr. Thomas Moslons, Mr. Ivan_SVW, Mr. Michael Hader, Mr. Tories Curse, Mr. Monkey Man, Mr. Diego Castro, Mr. Fortis Unum, Mr. Gentle Salamander, and CMD Neo. Thank you, each and every one of you. I love you and I appreciate you. Thank you guys also very much for doing this. It means the absolute world to me. Sign up today with our memberships, get a bunch of awesome benefits, early access to these videos, behind the scenes stuff, some good loving from yours truly, hand in making the channel run, and most importantly, my love and support. Yes indeed. But remember, this will always be free, so whether you give your boy a dollar a night, I will do you just the same. Mwah! Well, ladies and gentlemen, I've been the General Brother 101. You've been beautiful, awesome, amazing people. Thank you all so very much for watching. Y'all make sure to stay strong with that, boys and gals. And I will catch y'all next time. Dismiss, Rangers. Love that cinematic, not gonna lie, but I do wish we got to see that big chunky Praetor absolutely sandwich an Iron Warrior into with that massive hammer. One day. One day.